Welcome back to the Invincible Innovation Podcast, the podcast for changemakers and innovators shaping the future of our world. I'm your host, Mazor, Kario, product design and AI expert, and in this episode, we have the privilege of speaking with a brilliant AI researcher about the crucial topic of bias and fairness in AI algorithms. Join us as we uncover the complexities, challenges, and solutions surrounding this critical issue. Let's start. Hi, Ashmi.
Hi, Adi.
I,
Nice to
I'm
meet
so
you.
I'm so happy that you're here, Ashmi. Ashmi Banerjee is a PhD researcher at Technical University of Munich. And as I said at the beginning, I'm so happy that I have a young woman with me. So I'll do my best to have this like best experience from now on, that you'll have lots of additional talks from here on. That's what I hope.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm very thankful to you for inviting me and for giving me this opportunity. And I hope after our discussion today, people will have at least something to ponder upon. And yeah, that will be my biggest achievement. Yeah.
I'm sure that they're gonna think about like some of the stuff that you're bringing on. So let's dive in. What exactly is AI bias, and why it's so significant concern? What's the problem with it?
Yes. So, I mean, I guess I don't have to really explain what AI is to people because, I mean, there has been a lot in this area in the recent past. But before I delve deeper into explaining what bias is and why it is significant and everything, I would like to highlight a very interesting and a very important concept. All these systems that are present, so all these AI systems or the systems that are using like artificial intelligence or even like any sort of application that you find on the web that is serving some purpose, it's not a single stakeholder platform. It actually it encompasses several stakeholders. That is, it is a multifaceted system with several stakeholders involved in it. So if that system only caters for a single stakeholder in this process, then it is bound to end up in like concerns. It is bound to end up in having concerns with regards to the ethical integrity and stuff like that. So it should always cater to like all the stakeholders that are involved in this whole process. Let's just see an example. I mean, what I'm saying, because it's a lot of jargon. So, for example, you consider yourself like booking a hotel on some hotel booking platform, say Airbnb or hotels.com or booking.com, whatever you want, right? Here, you as the user, you represent the whole consumer, right? The consumer system. Whereas the hotels that are listed on the platforms are the items that you are looking at.
Right.
And the individuals or the organizations that are offering these hotels, your Airbnb hosts or whoever, they become the item providers because they are providing you with that service. And lastly, the platform that allows you to do this, that is the hotel booking website or whatever, the service is being offered, they become the platform. And each stakeholder in this whole scenario has their distinct interests and they are tied to this whole application process, whether it's a recommendation or it's some other service, whatever it is. So for example, the travelers or the users, they try to discover the hotels that match with their preferences or their needs, whereas the hotels, they want to seek like fair visibility to attract more guests so that they are listed on the top and like not really like overlooked, or even say for example the platforms, they want to maximize their commissions that they receive through like advertising these hotels or these item space, right? So in an ideal world, all these stakeholders should have like equal benefits or be valued equally in the process. But in reality, that's not the case. And that's exactly when the biases and other unfair concerns kind of creep in. So this AI bias or like biases in data or biases in AI systems, it's basically like the discrepancy that is being caused. And it can be caused because of different things. You know, it can be data bias, it can be any other cultural bias, cognitive bias, whatever. We will talk about it later. But, and then it leads to some sort of discriminatory outcome, right? So maybe some hotels are favored over other hotels, even if they do not match up to the quality. Or, you know, they are like sometimes in a different situation, they might be like people or like users might be discriminated on the basis of like racial or gender or age or other factors, you know. And these biases, they can stem from various sources that I said. So that is why, and it becomes a very significant concern. I mean, we will go into details later because it kind of deprives certain group of people or certain group of stakeholders from what they deserve.
But you give an example, let's take booking, for example, where as consumers of the hotels need the services that the platform provides us,
Mhm.
and the hotel needs us as customers. So it's a
Yes,
marketplace that the platform is allowing, and she's taking some of the revenues from the hotels.
absolutely.
So that's more or less, as I see it, it makes sense. Everybody is like a win-win situation. This is what I
Yes,
want, this is what they buy. But let's go to the AI systems. In that case, I'm trying to understand when you're saying stakeholders. Do you mean that if I create an image in Midjourney, all the paintings that were created by the artists before that and are the origin for the new creation of the AI are not taken into consideration,
exactly.
right? And of
Yes,
course, the platform is much more powerful, and then therefore the companies who created these platforms, and there are not many of them, they would be much richer, and
yes.
as you end users could use them for not that much money with lots of benefits.
Yeah, exactly. I think I read or I heard somewhere about a similar use case. So I think so the artists, the real artists, you know, whose art these on whose art these models have been trained on, they are kind of protesting against this whole Gen AI revolution because they are like, okay, we will not be valued anymore because I mean a lot of effort, a lot of like work goes into building or the painting that they have produced. And now if Midjourney does it in like a few seconds, then obviously they don't deserve the kind of accolade that they deserve, or their talent kind of goes unnoticed, right? Because everyone will be like, yeah, but why will I pay this artist, you know, several $1,000s? I will just, you know, use Midjourney and to generate the same quality or even better quality of art.
Right.
So there
And
are,
you could
yes,
say the same for the art, for the copywriting, for the
everything,
screenwriting, for the poetry, for the business plan, for the lawyer's advice or agreement,
everything. Or
everything.
even medical. You know, it's like, why do I go to a doctor? Because my AI system can diagnose it. I mean, it can also backfire because you never know, like you can have like a very weird condition which is like one of a kind, and then it can backfire. But like for say a usual thing which is very common and with which the um, as we call it, like supervised learning, right? So which the model has already seen many times, then in that case, if it can work out pretty well, right?
Yeah,
So in
but
that case,
when I have a very rare disease and I'm going
yes,
to a
exactly.
doctor, he is relying on his past knowledge, meaning situations that are common. And if I
Mhm.
have a rare disease, he would probably will not know about it as much as the AI, because AI is representing the data in the world and the prevalency of these parts of data, right?
Yes. I mean, it can also like work out pretty well because obviously, like AI is like a conglomeration of like, say, many different doctors, many different medical scenarios that it has been trained upon. But in reality, it could also be the case that either it backfires or it works out pretty well. So there's a fine line, I think, at some point where you kind of need human intervention. That's my personal opinion. I'm not a medical expert, but yeah, that's my
Yeah,
takeaway from where the systems stand at the moment.
yeah. You started with the aspect of, I think it's more of a fairness point of view. Is it fair that only Google and Microsoft, which is OpenAI, I know, I don't know
Yes.
how the connection works, but it's Microsoft's ability right now. They're the only companies in the world who have this capacity in order to rule this amount of power that will change the world for sure. That's one side, which is like how fair is it and what is the implications for our world. I thought that you would talk about at the beginning is like the data is biased because people are biased, and the data that is entering and building this system and teaching these systems, learning systems, is biased. I thought that you would start from that part. Why did you start from the fairness part?
Um, I think yes, that is because that's already the cause, right? I mean, you cannot really do too much on an algorithmic level to change too much about what the or how the data is. That's my opinion, right? I mean, sure,
Mm,
you can try to like see that okay, the data that you are training your model on is kind of balanced, has all the, it's kind of representative of what you're trying to achieve, but in reality, it's often not the case, right? I mean,
mm.
let's just take this example of women in tech. You just like started with that, right? That we
Right.
have so few women in tech, and it's so difficult to get more women in tech, because that's like a fundamental problem, right? And that cannot be solved with building better algorithms or
Just
anything.
a
But
minute. Just
sure.
a minute. Sorry. Yeah, I'm with you. It was my dog. She has to come in. It's part of the discussion. Yeah, I'm with
No
you. Sorry.
problem. No problem. So I think like it's a fundamental problem which cannot be solved using AI, or it cannot be solved using like better algorithms. Like we cannot get more women in tech, but we are using better algorithms in our systems, right? So we have to address it on more on a policymaker level, more on motivating more girls to join tech, and on like different levels. And that will eventually, maybe 50 years later or 100 years later, help us bridge the data gap. you know
Mm,
so it's a very different thing. So that's why I started addressing it from a point of view where we, as like computer scientists, we as researchers, can possibly address it. So I mean, there are lots of toolkits. I mean, Google has their own, Microsoft has, IBM has like some Fair Learn. Microsoft has, I think, Fair
the
Learn. And
responsible AI program.
yes. No,
This is
these are basically like fairness. These are like metrics, a bunch of metrics, and then they will help you to see whether your algorithm is basically like fair, or it has some concerns, ethical concerns. And each has their own metrics, and each has their own evaluation criteria. But I mean, that is not going to solve the data bias problem, right? So
Why
that
do you
is.
think it's not a good solution? If you say
Mm,
we have this criteria of some kind of equality or just thinking about minorities or taking that into consideration, why do you think it's not a kind of solution?
I am not saying it's not the good solution. I'm saying that it will not handle the data bias problem, but it will handle, obviously, like your existing system. It will help you probably, like depending again, because fairness is a very uh, task specific, or very like, I mean, there is no single definition of fairness. So it differs from different, like area to area, or different, like case by case basis, basically. So we have to
Right.
evaluate it on a case by case basis. So maybe it will solve your use case. Like it will probably, with your existing information, your existing system, maybe these metrics will actually help you solve your problem. But then what I'm saying is they might not solve your problem of data bias, the
Mm.
specific problem that I'm talking about. Like they
Mm.
would not change. I mean, maybe the data that you are training it on, you can use some sort of simulation, and then you can make sure that all the metrics that you're trying, or all the features that you are there, trying to address, like there's no minority thing, or it's kind of representative. But what
Mhm.
I'm trying to say is, in the real world, it will not solve it.
I see. So give us a few examples of bias that manifest in AI systems and some examples that we could think about.
For example, I mean, we already talked about the data bias, right? And like pure women in tech or pure, and there has been a lot of cases actually, a very interesting use case some years ago. I think Amazon released some sort of a automated CV screening mechanism. And they said, thought that, oh, this is awesome. This is going to work very well because now we don't have to manually go through the CVs, but we can just use some sort of bot to classify the CVs whether they are fit for hiring or not. But then in that process afterwards, they realized that it was severely discriminatory against women because the models that this or the data this model was trained on had very few women CVs or had seen very few women CVs. So obviously it thought that women are not capable of the job. So it was, and then Amazon immediately took action against it. I think they took it down, and then yeah. So
Yeah,
that is like a um, very, what should I say, a very popular use case of data bias and how it
yeah,
actually affected in real life. Then there are other things like cultural bias or cognitive bias. So I did this myself. If you just Google like images of a nurse, the first few pictures that will show up are of that of a woman. Why? So that's because of the cognitive bias and the bias that we already have. Like, okay, if it's a nurse, it's always going to be a woman. And but it's the stereotyping, right? So it's going to change
yeah.
because nowadays, yes,
But stereotype is based on statistics, right? Usually, in all of the therapeutic professions, it could be a psychologist, a therapist, or a nurse, there are more women. So it's like that's what is in the world. Shouldn't AI be, like real, like a human that understands that most of the nurses in most of the places are women?
yes, but shouldn't it be like I have heard so many times, like some of my friends, like female friends in the medical profession, saying that they're not taken seriously because they are women, because they are like people are like, hey, please call the doctor, and like I'm the doctor, but that kind of a thing. So sure, AI systems should reflect what or how the data looks like, but it should not be discriminating towards other people or deserving individuals. That's something that is like the fundamental thing that of ethical or ethics in AI that preach that you should not be discriminatory towards certain group or individual or whoever is involved in the process. So
I,
by
I just want
yes,
to ask another question about discrimination. If if something is presenting the output of what is like common, nurses are commonly women, okay?
mhm,
And another thing is decision making, okay? So now on, I'm going to take only women for this job. This is like a decision making algorithm, which is a different point of view, and then it could be discriminative. But
yeah.
when you're just presenting the real world, which is different, women and men are different, I guess, why do you think it's discriminative?
In my opinion, I think it is discriminative because I would want to get the same treatment or the same kind of, vibes from my patients if I were a medical expert that a male counterpart is getting. Because I feel like just because of my gender, I'm losing out on some. I mean, here in this case, it's probably just like people not taking me seriously, but there could be other implications as well. I mean, again, you can only tell the best when you are there. And I mean, I also this whole minority thing, right? You kind of, I think that's a problem, right? We probably are going a bit off the track from AI, but this
That's
whole
a
my
question about how do we understand bias? Like when
yes,
it's presenting the world, when there is like mirroring what there is in the world, it's not a bias. It's like actually most of the nurses are usually women. It's I don't know in most countries. I didn't like check in
yes.
all the statistics. Maybe it's somewhere else it's different. And I'm trying to understand what is like the point that you're saying. Okay, now it's discriminating or it's biased. So I could say, okay, maybe we don't have enough women who are in leadership positions. Right now, we don't have that.
No,
We don't
we
have,
don't.
not in politics, not in
No.
corporates, nowhere. Okay. And we should aspire to have more women. But if you're asking me about what are the qualities right now in leadership, in politics, wherever, it's some of the qualities are related to the fact that there are more men there. You can say, okay, we wish or we aspire to have different future, but right now that's the picture.
Yes, and that's why you should start like early. So, I mean, it's important to have role models and all that's, but then there's no role model to be found. But then on the other hand, if you say start early by mentoring and by motivating the women who are aspiring, often happens that there is a lot of women. I mean, I'm from India. I can tell you a little bit about India, how it is in India. So I never really realized that having fewer women in tech is a problem until I came to Germany. So, because in my class, we had almost 50%, I was studying computer science, we had almost 50% women.
Wow.
But you know where the problem is?
Where?
Afterwards, society kind of like prevents these women to work
Why
because
do you
of
see
society.
that?
Um, it's either society, like I mean, most of the women were very ambitious and very, like, I mean, they're studying, they have a bachelor's degree in computer science, so they can
Yeah,
get
of course.
something in life, like in terms of like career achievement and stuff. So they can, if they want to, I mean, they can get pretty good jobs and stuff. But the thing is, often it has been seen that even though, at least in India, like even though there are lots of like almost 50% of women studying in at the like the bachelor level, the higher you go up, the number of women decrease because either because of society forces them to stay back at home, and like the families are such that still in a significant chunk of the society that they do not really appreciate the woman of the house going out and working, or and instead of not looking after their children or something like that. So like that is a big concern. So I
Mhm.
mean, again, we are deviating, but still, I think it's a
Yeah.
very valid topic to be addressed. So
Mhm.
I think that, and then afterwards, when you see like the women in management managerial roles, or up the ladder, you see that there are very, very few. So what happened to
Right.
these women who started off in their bachelors?
Right.
We
Right.
lost them on the way.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I come from tech too, and I understand what you're saying. I'm just saying, like, the border when we're talking about AI of presenting mirroring the reality and influencing the future of our understanding of diversity, of other races, of genders, whatever is the way that you want to capture the future, and therefore you're changing the reality. You see what I mean? Like the reality is people are biased. That's like that. It's not that I like it or not. That's how
Yes.
people are, right?
Yes, it
So
is. But like my understanding or my way of thinking is that if you're so people are biased, you can't really do too much about it because they are people,
right,
they are bound to have their own opinions. But models are something
right.
that you design from scratch. So it's
Mm-hmm.
kind of in your hands. Sure, there are like data biases and there are things that kind of model also learns. Yeah, I recently overheard, I don't know how true this thing is, I heard someone saying it, so don't quote me, but I heard that in the Middle East they had some robot, and that had to be like immediately like stopped, or like stopped from taking in part in action or something, because it was standing next to a woman and then it started touching her
Mm-hmm.
inappropriately. So this is not okay, right? But this happens every day in the reality, right? But then
Right.
models are something that you have full control over, right? You are designing it from scratch. So
Mm-hmm.
would you like to like why would you like to spread something which you know it's wrong for the society, you know it's wrong? So why would you
Mm-hmm.
like to then promote that through your models, and why would you not take any initiative to change that? So that is my understanding, or that's how I kind of also see AI ethics as.
I see. You're saying if we can build a virtual new world, why don't we build it better
Yeah,
based on
of
what we
course.
think it should be, not based on what the reality is, right?
Yeah,
This is what you're
why
saying.
not?
So let's talk about what are the potential consequences of biased AI algorithm in real world applications. So we mentioned one in Amazon in their
Yes,
TV selection.
yes.
Give us a few more examples. What could go wrong there?
Lots. So, I mean, not just Amazon, I think like there has been potential allegations against Spotify and YouTube as well for depriving certain artists on their platforms, and like some of the songs on Spotify or some songs by certain artists getting more exposure than the other ones. So that's why like the artists kind of losing out on like the exposure that they deserve, or even eventually also money. So these kind of keep happening, or even on like ride sharing platforms, Uber and stuff, they have been also like, okay, certain drivers get more rides because of certain things and others do not. So these things keep happening. And this is a very, very like common problem in all these like multi-stakeholder systems, because some people or the other kind of lose out in this whole process. Yeah, and so there's this whole the economic starvation is kind of a thing where certain people actually lose out. So actually, I wrote my master thesis on a similar topic, like exposure bias, quantifying exposure biases for these two-sided platforms, and then where we kind of talked about like position bias and how like popularity bias and position bias, two main types of biases. So one is the position bias is like when you are talking about a ranked list of results, depending on where you stand in that rank list. So whether you're in the top 5, 10, whatever, versus where you're in the bottom 5, 10, whatever, it makes a lot of difference, because how many times have you scrolled to the next page of Google, right? Your Google search results, right? Very, very rare. So that's something, and that's kind of position bias. So depending on where you kind of stand in your results, it makes a lot of difference on how much money, in the sense that how many people will click on your link, and in the process, how much money you're going to make. Yeah, and then the popularity bias is basically like, say, if you're a very popular place located at a very popular location. So for example, if you are like a cafe located very close to the Eiffel Tower in Paris, then obviously you, irrespective of your quality, like even if you serve the crappiest food ever, you're probably going to get enough customers compared to a very fancy cafe, which not even fancy, but very like good quality cafe, which serves the best quality food, but then it's in a remote location.
Yeah.
So that's called
So,
popularity bias.
but I'm trying to think about it. If let's say there is a very good popular, it's not good, it's a popular
Mm,
cafe, and I'm
yes.
looking as a tourist for a cafe. You mean
Hmm.
that this coffee shop that is not that good, but many people pass through it because it's in a very touristic area, would get a better result, and you would probably let me know that this is a place I should go to just for the fact that it's located there, and not because the coffee is better there. That's what you're saying.
I I don't. So research shows. I'm not saying research shows that it will get a lot more customers, but whether it will be recommended to your friends as like the best coffee shop to go to, that is not there. So I don't think like people will just recommend you like, hey, you if you are in Paris, you must visit this coffee shop, even though they have the crappiest coffee ever. I don't think anyone recommends places like this. So they only recommend you things that you should definitely do or you should definitely not do. Maybe that has a very fantastic view. So in that case, you will still, even if you get a recommendation, you would probably get it like, oh yeah, you should definitely stop by this coffee shop. It has a great view, but be careful, the coffee there sucks. So
Yeah.
that kind of like a recommendation so that you're already aware of. But what I'm trying to say, or what research already shows, is that it will definitely get a lot more customers who do not come by any recommendation, but just for the sheer place of where it is located. Like you're just passing by the Eiffel Tower, so you're just like, okay, you want to grab a drink, so you just go and grab a drink. So that kind of a thing.
But this is how it works in the real world. The fact that it's in a touristic area, they probably pay more for the usage of the space there. I guess they're paying more taxes, I guess, because they're near the touristic area, and they get more customers. Why is it different in the fact that online it is representing the real world, which is more people go there because more people are there. For sure, more people are
again
next to that place.
Yeah, but then say there is another cafe who is doing like working really hard to provide very good quality food and like has decent interiors and like comparable quality. So the comparison can only be made when all the other things are kind of constant. So if you are comparing like a 5-star hotel to like a roadside place, obviously it does not make any sense. But you should compare a 5-star hotel with a 5-star hotel. So in this case, if you're comparing this cafe who's paying like, so say they are paying the equal rent and equal infrastructure and other things, and then there is another one where only the only difference is the location. In that case, it has been seen that the cafe or the restaurant which is located in a remote location kind of loses out on business opportunities because of its location. So
I see. Yeah. So it's not only the fact that it's like geographically accessible that you could reach it, the fact that it's there has so many additional benefits that is not related to anything. That's what you're saying.
Exactly.
So how can we identify and measure bias in an AI model?
So there are lots of ways. So there are, say, like this whole algorithmic evaluation. So as I said, like different companies have their different toolkits which measure the like how fair your algorithms are performing, and depending on like different matrices and stuff. And then there are like other things like based on your particular use case, you can have your own fairness indicators. As I said, like the concept of fairness kind of varies from case to case. So you can also define your metrics and then see how well your algorithms perform against those metrics, and then take the necessary steps. You can also do some post-processing. So these are kind of doing post-processing. So after your model has been already built, you can also like try to mitigate biases by seeing like sometimes reweighing the things, or also changing the representation. As I earlier mentioned, that maybe you notice that certain things are like certain features in your data are kind of sensitive features and they are not that well represented. So maybe you kind of use some sort of simulated data or some sort of reweighing strategies to make sure that everything is kind of weighed out. Or you can also use something like counterfactual analysis, so where you can try to understand that what happens if this certain thing is not there. So for example, if gender is a sensitive attribute, you try to omit the gender and then see how well it performs, whether there's any difference on the model prediction or not. Right. But there is also an interesting aspect on this. It has been seen that if you say in this, let's talk about the CV thing, right? Like the CV decision-making thing. So if you just say, okay, I mean, I don't want a model that discriminates against women. So from all the CVs, I just hide the sensitive information about gender, right? So I say that, okay, like no CV should mention any gender information. And now I feed the remaining information to my model, and then I train my model on it. But it has been seen that there are, like, even if you omit these directly or this direct attributes, there are some indirect attributes. So for example, if you have a section called hobbies on your CV, and if you're a woman, it has been seen that you are most likely to pursue hobbies like, say, ballets or, I don't know, dancing and stuff like that. But if you're a man, stereotypically, it has been seen like you're playing football or, I don't know, cricket or whatever. So just from these things, you can also, the model often turns out to be biased.
Yeah, I think that if I'm not mistaken, it's even the way that you structure or build the CV, the way that
Yes,
you're saying things about
yes.
yourself. Women will be more apologetic, they will be more soft, they will not be that
Hmm.
concise, not sharp. They would
Yes,
say things
absolutely.
in a different way.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, there are these other fine prints which probably are like the human eye is ignorant to, but then the model learns it because there are these like subtle things that are present, and these things are also so that's why some people have proposed some sort of like causal graphs and then trying to see like which attribute is how they are mapped to the other attributes, the potentially like influencing attribute, and then like getting a graph out of it and then trying to omit this whole thing of the thing, and so that you kind of have like the dependencies also taken care of, and that has somewhat worked. So that could be one option, but then again it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, but
So
it cannot
we
be done
said,
by human just naked eye, you know.
right. It's hard to understand like exactly what are the nuances. And so we
Exactly.
just said one is the data, make sure that the data is balanced in a way. Second
Yes,
is what we call responsible AI. All the matrices, you need to make sure
yes,
that these are things that you need to measure and test and see how your model is doing. And the last one that you mentioned is the fact that the way that the data is structured need to be cleaned from any aspects of discrimination, of things that
yes,
could be different in that
yes.
aspect.
Another or a few more things I would like to add there. So another very interesting way that has been shown to work pretty well in addressing these unfairness concerns are the concept of explanations. So, for example, I guess everyone has made at some point used Amazon or Netflix or whatever, right? All these like recommended systems or these platforms where you have also encountered statements such as like this camera is a must buy for you because in the past you have also bought so and so, or you watched Lord of the Rings, you might also like Harry Potter, and there are these explanations that why is a certain thing being recommended to you, that and so that it's no longer like a black box. So this kind of also from the user side helps to build a little bit of trust in the system. Okay, the system is not just randomly recommending things to me, but it is doing that for a reason. And this is the reason. So, this, and also from the platform or the provider side, it's kind of like the whole transparency. So, you should be transparent with whatever you're recommending or whatever, you're suggesting in the end, like whatever decision making process is being proposed, there should be some sort of explanation. There should be, and it should not just be a random black box. So this, I think, is very, very important. And I would also like to emphasize on a couple of other things. So, for example, once you have built a model and it's in production, it's working awesome, just don't forget about it. Like we should be, we should keep an eye on it, and then we should monitor it from time to time to see that it is not picking up any biases on the way. Maybe it's encountering some new data and then it's kind of like messing up with what it has learned, and then it is outputting some random things which are probably biased or which are not fair to certain stakeholders. And in that case, you might have to retrain or you might have to take the necessary measures. So it is very important to keep an eye on like your models and your understand the model behavior.
I think that we mentioned that in a few last episodes about the fact that when you're creating a software, usually you're debugging it and it's all working and it's in production, everything is working, and you forget about it. You build other features from now on.
Hmm.
While we're talking about AI, you need to monitor it all the way, all the time, to make sure that you're in the right direction, that's showing exactly the data that you want, not showing the data that you don't want. And if we're talking about bias, maybe it was sufficiently unbiased when we put it in production and deliver it to our clients. And right now it's changing because it's a learning system. It's learning all the time.
Yes, absolutely. So this is a very important thing to address.
Can you share any examples of successful efforts to address bias and promote fairness in AI technologies?
I mean, I already talked about the Microsoft and Google and IBM's initiatives, these like fairness toolkits that they have. Another thing that I really think should be addressed, or like I found it very interesting when I was preparing this, was this. ProPublica. So it's a US criminal. So ProPublica, they conducted some analysis of the Compass algorithm that is being used in the US criminal justice system. So the Compass algorithm basically tells you whether an offender is going to repeat the offense against or not, like what probability, and accordingly, steps are taken for or against that person.
It's like the Minority Report movie, but just without these floating people, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So when they like analyzed this tool, they realized that there was a significant racial disparity against the African American defendants, because they were most likely to be penalized or falsely flagged as high risk compared to like white defendants, even though reality showed something else. And then they immediately corrected it because there was a lot of like public interest and public debate and all these things, and they immediately corrected it. And so it kind of, I think it sparked a controversy, which ultimately led to like refinement of laws and refinement of rules and betterment of society. So I think that is a very successful effort. So I definitely would like to highlight that. And there has been a lot of studies in this area, actually, like studying this Compass tools, and they're like this like unfairness and fairness criteria and all these things. So there's a lot going on in that area. So at some point, I think in the 2018, 19, or like 17, 18, that period, there was a lot of, this received a lot of attention also in the research community.
I'm creating a course for creating generative AI applications. And yesterday I wrote the lesson for bias and legal. And I gave this example because it's so prominent that the fact you could see that a person who is African American who has only one felony would get a higher degree of, he might go back to being criminal than a white person that has like a list of 4 or 5 felonies in the past, but he's white, so it's like less, he gets a grade for that. It's like, wow, it's unbelievable just to see that. And how influencing it could be if the decision making is done without going into the details and just getting some kind of a recommendation. And we all know that legal systems are very saturated with lots of work, and they don't have the time to do their work calmly. That's how I would say. So it's a huge thing just to think about it. And what you just mentioned is very, very insightful in that sense, that, right now we have parts of the legal system, either in the police or in the legislation or in lawyers or in judges, who have some kind of discrimination, just bias because they're people. That's it. And when we were building this system, we could make a better effort to wield these things without all the what we might think about people or the stereotypes that are not reasonable in some cases.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I would just reiterate on that point that since we are building the models and we know what is right and what is wrong, in our opinion, at least in some cases, so then why also teach the model the same thing? I mean, when we know that it is kind of wrong. So we should build our models as good as possible, or in terms of like ethics. So yeah.
we just talked about the ethics and the bias from the side of the people who build these systems, the companies who are building these models or using these models. On the other side of responsible AI and all these toolkits, there is the legislation and the
Mhm.
regulations that are coming from governments worldwide. I think the EU just published like half a year or a year ago their AI Act. Could you say something about that?
Yes, so I think like the policymakers, it's very important that they have the right guidelines and the right things, so regulations and guidelines, and because it can, if it doesn't work out, it might backfire, right? I mean, sure, the EU AI Act, I don't want to comment too much on it because I think it's, in general, EU is pretty well organized in terms of like the data privacy and stuff. So it has its pros and cons. But I recently, again, I mean, it was an like my source of information was Twitter, so I'm not sure how actually true the thing is. But I recently saw that Indian government saying that they like all sorts of Gen AI applications or all sorts of things that go into like make money, so production ready systems, they need the approval of the government. So if that is the case, then they may or may not be as good, you know. I mean, in the sense like the policy may or may not be as good. So there are like all these questionable practices. So like these things. So again, I don't quote me. I'm not 100% sure about like also the fine print of the thing. I just saw it on Twitter, and then that kind of sparked a lot of debate and a lot of conversations. Maybe there are like fine prints in there which probably ensure that that's not the case. Like everyone who wants to build a Gen AI startup needs to get the permission from the government. So obviously, I'm sure like they will be not that stupid to do that. But yeah, there should be some fine print there. But what I'm trying to say is that it's very important that the governments and the policymakers, they do take into consideration the responsible AI and these things as an important part. Because now with this whole, the Gen AI landscape and all these things are very tricky, and also things are very new. So you do not know like what you are kind of leaving out or what can possibly happen in the future, because it's a very, very new thing. We are talking about how amazing it is that Midjourney recreates this thing, but in the process we are kind of missing out on the fact that it's kind of affecting the artists or like the all these things. So Gen AI is a very, very new field. So whether it's compliant with the ethics and stuff, it's not yet fully evaluated, in my opinion. So governments and policymakers should be careful when they are making the rules to have like enough room for taking into consideration the ethical perspectives.
Yeah.
And obviously, one way would be to like invest more in research and education and collaboration and so like the generic things. But the most important thing should be also to force or to make sure that the companies who build these things, they have like accountability and transparency in their applications, because that's something I often feel like it's missing. Then there are like episodes, and then there is very little accountability on the part of the companies, and that should be that is an essential aspect, I think, that comes from the policymaker.
I totally agree what you're saying about the regulations, and I went into more details because I wanted to learn it more for the lesson that I created. I would say it's like an elaboration of the GDPR that started like many years ago, and it's only parts of the aspects of the implication of AI. Bias is only one of them. As I see it in general, and you see it in the discussions in the Senate when Mike Zuckerberg is coming and when they talk to Sam Altman, the policymakers are not understanding the technology fully. they don't really
Mm.
understand the implications, and they don't really understand it fully, because there are not many people in the world that understand it, surely not in politics, in regulations, and in law.
Yes.
Therefore, the policy that they're making, these policymakers, is usually not up to date, and is not strong enough, and is not looking forward to the future that might be in the very near future. We're not talking like 20 years from now, we're talking 5 years from now.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing is that the regulations are so slow usually. This AI Act has been
Mm.
done miraculously kind of fast, right? Because it has all the preconditions for the GDPR. But I guess that they would need to do much more than that, not only regarding bias and accountability, transparency, fairness. Not only that, is because this is going to change the world and the workforce and the way that we interact with technology and our social structures. There's so
Mm-hmm.
many more implications that they are not really handling right now.
I absolutely agree. And I mean, it's kind of the problem in the most government sectors. And when you try to like introduce technology, and there is this whole aversion, and living in Germany, I can totally vouch for it. Yeah, I mean, this whole like digitization is kind of it's kind of a very disputed problem. It's a kind of myth to be, you know, to be honest, because especially in the public sector or in the government sector, because there's so much aversion to technology. In this regard, because they probably do not understand the implications or the how it works and all these things too well, because in Germany they still think that sending a letter is still better than an encrypted email, because they don't really understand that, that there's whole encryption process. And even if they do understand, it is so difficult to bring about the change on a national level or even on a state-wise level, because you have to basically build the systems. And then there comes again, there's this problem of like lack of labor and whatever. So because of other things, it's super hard to realize these things. And yeah, so I totally get that, the understanding, that the lack of understanding for these guys. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're almost done. I have my last question before I ask you about what you're doing. And your number one tip for AI entrepreneurs today.
Um, I would say like, hmm, I think I would say that no matter what system you build, how awesome it is, it will not work out if you do not prioritize like fairness and like the ethical integrity of the system. So, and transparency, most importantly, transparency. Yeah, so that would be like in short my number one tip.
You're saying that because the regulations would make sure that they will pay for it, or because you think that the result will not be as good? Their product would be biased and people would be, I know, hurt, or they would
Exactly.
sue them.
Yeah, more the latter, because I feel like regulations are not there yet to, make sure that everything is in place. So that will still take some years until they are, they can take care of these things. But why I am saying this is because I feel like either their product is going to like, harm a certain group of people, or will be, will be biased towards some people or groups, and something will not work out, or some stakeholders. I mean, I wouldn't even say people or groups, but I would rather say stakeholders, because you don't know, like, and then something will go wrong, and then yeah. So in the long run, in order to be sustainable, I think you have to prioritize transparency and ethical integrity. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Where could people hear more about your work, about what you're doing in your research, and contact you?
Sure. I mean, you can learn more about my work and or get in touch with me through LinkedIn or Twitter. Yeah, or just like on my website, you can like I try to update it almost like as frequently as possible.
Yeah.
So I try to keep it updated. So yeah, that would
At
be great.
Ashmi Banerjee,
.com.
ashmibanerjee.com, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So thank you again. It's been a pleasure. Lots of insights and understanding of what is fairness, what is bias, and why it's so important for us and for our future. So thank you again.
Thank you so much for this opportunity once again. And it was a pleasure talking to you, discussing all these things. And I think that these are very, very valid topics and that should be addressed as well. So
Thanks. And to all of you change makers out there, thank you for joining us. And if you found this episode valuable, you're invited to share it. And I'll see you next week with another innovative, insightful talk. See ya.